first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all of them were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was the Christ. Yet God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the desert. These things happened as examples for us, so that we might not desire evil things as they did. Do not grumble, as some of them did, and suffered death by the destroyer. These things happened to them as an example, and they have been written down as a warning to us, upon whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore, whoever thinks he is standing secure should take care not to fall. The word of the Lord.
Our second reading comes from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. St. Paul refers back to the experience of the people Israel when they had experienced God's liberating and gracious love, when they were led out of Egypt, that place of slavery. Now, St. Paul relates the experience of these people through Moses, through the guidance of Moses, with the situation of the Christians. And he does it in an allegorical way. The people Israel was guided by the cloud, the presence of God. And this cloud also led them out of Egypt by passing through the sea, the act of liberation. And they drank water that came from a rock that was struck by Moses as they were wandering in the desert. Now, St. Paul reminded the Corinthians of those elements of the liberation that was experienced by the people Israel. And he gave them some sort of a Christian meaning. The cloud and the passing through the sea was the foretaste of baptism, the bath of baptism. And the rock from which water sprung that quenched the thirst of the Israelites, according to St. Paul, was really Christ, the rock of our faith. So everything that happened to the Israelites was a prefiguration of what will happen to the liberation in Christ that we Christians will enjoy. Now, St. Paul reminds the Corinthians and all of us. Look at what happened to the Israelites, he says. They were already freed by God. God journeyed with them. God made their history one of liberation rather than a continuous history of slavery. But the Israelite people, they did not appreciate God's graciousness. They forgot the graciousness of God. And they longed to go back to Egypt. They longed for the pleasures of food and drink provided to them in Egypt, while they were wandering in the desert. And so their evil desires really put them down. They were already freed, but now they have returned to slavery, a new form of slavery, the slavery that comes to us when we forget God's graciousness and when we prefer other things to the love of God. Now, if that had happened to the Israelites under the guidance of Moses, St. Paul is telling the Corinthians, beware, I'm warning you. You might end up that way if you do not follow the gracious God. If you set aside God's goodness to you, if you forget what God has done for you, if your hearts become hearts of ingratitude, rather than of grateful memory, then you might be enslaved again. So, this is a good warning given to the Corinthians and given to us as we prepare to journey with Jesus on the cross. Will we forget God's goodness to us? Will we waste God's efforts in order to free us? Will we waste Christ's death on the cross and exchange that precious act of love for things that really do not matter? I'm sure all of us can identify with what St. Paul is saying. It happened to the Jews, it can happen to Christians. So the warning is before us. Will you waste God's gift? Will you waste the death of Christ? If you do, if you will decide to waste God's gift to us, then we are leading ourselves into misery and to further enslavement.